Hello, welcome to Chapter 10 of The Dirt Bike Racer. We watched the other heats. Mike, competing in the 125cc class, came in close second, winning 15 points in a heat with 24 riders. That gave him a total of 53 so far, having come in 5th and 1st in the earlier two meets. He had as good a chance as anyone to win the trophy when the meets were over. We had a light lunch, hot dogs, potato chips and sodas, and 1:30 rolled around at last. I was less worried than during the first heat, except for that hill. I'm sure it worried every other rider too. I could tell by the way they looked at it. But it was there, and it had to be climbed. If you didn't make it, you were out of it. It was that simple. At last the gun blasted and we took off. My little Johnny Joe flew up that hill like a real-life pony. Granted, not a smooth-riding pony. She bounced, galloped, and tried hard to unseat me. But I hung on, and soon the top of the hill was there in front of me, and then it was behind me. The toughest trial was over. I had conquered it. Running the laps was easier than during the first heat, but it was easier for the other riders too. I didn't know where I stood at the end of the first lap, nor at the end of the second one. I was more anxious to keep my bike under control than to bolt full speed ahead, taking a chance of having to mean spill. Finally it was over. I was pooped. Every inch of my body ached. And good thing too, Glenn Gardner hadn't tried any monkey business. The announcement of the winners came over the loudspeaker. Tom Pullin, who had come in third in my first heat, came in first. I waited anxiously for my name to be announced. Biff Daniels was second, Glenn Garner third, Ronald Baker fourth. Ronald Baker, that was me! I'd come in fourth, 2 better than in the first heat. Well, son, said my father, gripping my hand and smiling broadly, you've moved up a couple of notches. 4th place gives you 8 points, a total of 14 in all for the 2 heats. Congratulations. Hi, Honcho, Tony cried as he came running up. You're running like an old pro, man. I grinned tiredly. Right now, what I like is a big glass of water and a hot shower. Those, chimed my mother, you'll get at home. Come on, let's get cracking. We loaded the Johnny Joe into the truck of the car and drove home. It wasn't long after I had my glass of water and taken a shower that I got a phone call from Mr. Perkins. Ron, my boy, he said, a jovial ring in his voice. I just heard the bike reports over the local station. You came in 6th in the first heat and 4th in the second. That's good riding. Thanks, Mr. Perkins, I said, but there were only 7 of us in the meet. Don't kid yourself, he replied. Even with only 7, 6th and 4th is something. Did you enjoy it? That's the important thing. Oh, yes, I did, sir. I enjoyed it very much. Good. That's what I like to hear. OK, Ron, keep up the spirit and say hello to your family for me. I will, Mr. Perkins, thank you. I hung up. Can you beat that, I thought. He took the time to call me up and congratulate me. Who was that? My mother asked. Mr. Perkins. He heard the report over the radio and wanted to congratulate me. Even if you came in 6th and 4th, my mother smiled. He's a thoughtful gentleman indeed. He is really that, Dorothy, said my father. He likes you, Ron. You've made a friend in Mr. Perkins. He's a great guy, Dad. I'm glad that I've got him for a friend too. I guess I could consider Mr. Perkins almost as a close friend as Tony. But it was that friendship that bothered his nephew so much that he had paid a rider to scare me in the race. I got a surprise on Wednesday when my mother drew attention to an item in the evening paper. Read that, she said. I did. It was an announcement of an 8-mile cross-country test race for mini bikers. The race was going to take place on Saturday morning at 10 o'clock, starting at Miller's Grove. That was less than 10 minutes from here. Applicants had until 5 o'clock Thursday evening to sign up. The surprise was that my mother had taken the time to read the article and tell me about it. Up till now, I thought she'd had just a lukewarm interest in the sport. That's good. That sounds good, Ma, I said. Would you mind if I entered it? It would be something different. It certainly would, she agreed, and then shrugged. Well, I'll leave it up to your father. That's more along his line anyway. Where is he? I asked. I haven't seen him around for the last hour or so. I heard the kitchen door open, then my father's firm footsteps. Speaking of the devil, said my mother, smiling. My father stared at her. Who? What? I grinned. Hi, Dad, I said, and mentioned the article about the cross-country test race. I'd like to enter it. Can I? What's a cross-country test race? He asked, frowning. A test to see how the bikes stand up. That could be, I don't know. I can ask Mike. Well, that won't be necessary, my father said, heading for the sink. I suppose it would have been an interesting experience. Yes, you may enter it. He ran the water and washed his hands. I know that my eyes have been lit up like flashbulbs. Thanks, Dad. Now it's my turn, he replied, turning off the faucet and drying his hands. I'd like to go scuba diving for a while at Pumpkinhead Lake, and I wouldn't mind some company. How about it? I smiled. Why not? We left half an hour later and drove for most an hour to Honeymoon Point, some 3 miles from where Tony and I'd find the minibike, and then came home. My father hadn't been in the water for nearly a month, and I knew he missed it. Working a lot of overtime at his job left him too tired to do much else. He drove to Market Street immediately after arriving home from work the next day, and I signed up for the cross-country. He had to sign too. I paid the entry fee out of my own pocket. I asked the man I paid my fee to what a cross-country test race was, and his answer was exactly what my father had guessed it to be. It was to test the manoeuvrability and durability of the bikes, although an entrant didn't have to restrict his bike to the rules if he didn't want to. Since my bike was a restored piece of equipment, I thought that the test wasn't a bad idea. When we got home, my mother said that Holly had called. There wasn't very much to do on Friday, so I didn't need to come for a few days. I went to bed feeling disappointed about not working, but relieved in a way. The scuba diving had left me pretty exhausted, and I kept thinking about the cross-country and kind of terrain I would be biking over. Rough paths, rocks, ditches. No doubt cross-country meant exactly that. I soon fell asleep. But something during the night woke me. I opened my eyes and stared into the not too black darkness of the room. A light on the street corner about half a block away was just powerful enough to reach my window and turn most of the objects in my room into pale outlines. I heard the sound again, like the sharp squeak of a door, and I sprang up into a sitting position. Somebody was in our garage. Heart pounding, I got out of bed and tiptoed to the window. Very carefully I drew back one side of the curtain and peeked out. I was able to see the garage and the window that faced me. I stood there a few seconds, holding my breath. The garage was absolutely dark. Then there was a flash of light, as if a flashlight had been turned on. I realised the curtain ran out of the room and almost collided with my father. Dad, I whispered, somebody's in our garage. I know, he whispered back. What do you think I'm sneaking around with a flashlight like this for? I followed him down the stairs. Squeak, squeak. Sounds of the steps need some sound now driven into them, my father grunted softly. I never realised before how incredibly loud the squeak sounded. He reached the kitchen and very carefully approached the door. Me trailing my father by a step, he unlocked it, turned the knob, and pulled the door open. Just then I heard what sounded like a thud. It came from the rear of the garage. My father moved, and then for the thud sound was followed by that of running feet. In a second we saw the intruder. He was sprinting at an angle across the back of our lawn to the next. My father turned the light on him, catching a flash of a pair of dark pants and a dark windbreaker. We started after him, my father leaping off the porch with me at his heels. I didn't know whether Dad had put slippers on or not, but he ran as if nothing bothered his feet. I did too. The intruder hurdled the short fence, separating our yard from the next, then ducked and disappeared around the house. By the time my father got around the house and to the street, he was nowhere in sight. Darn it, my father exclaimed. I listened for running footsteps, but heard nothing. Well, No sense in standing here, my father started to say, when we heard a motorcycle start up in the distance. Well, there he goes. Come on, we might as well report this to the cops. Then check to see if he took anything. We returned to the garage where my father checked a rear window. The bottom sash was wide open. So that's how the boy got in, he said, and out. My father said, he cut a hole in the window, reached inside and unlocked it. A real pro. I wonder if he took anything, I said. Come in the house and get the key to the garage door, my father said. I'll call the cops. We went in and I got the key. I was slightly chilly, so I slipped on a light jacket while my father dialed for the police. I went out, unlocked the garage door and flickered on the 2 overhead lights. My mini bike was there in the corner where I'd left it, but it was lying on its side now, and I remembered distinctly having left it upright. End of chapter 10.